Next up, we have Weatherly Stephan. She's going to be presenting on Beyond Top Containers, Leveraging ArchivesSpace for Offsite Storage. Weatherly is the head of Archival Collections Management at NYU Libraries. As an inaugural member of ACM, she established a unified arrangement and description program for the NYU Special Collections and worked as part of the ArchivesSpace implementation and administration teams. Previously, she held processing positions at the New York Public Library and Brooklyn Historical Society. Weatherly?
Okay. Good morning. I'm going to talk today about the ways that my department, Archival Collections Management, or ACM as I'll call it, at NYU uses both native ArchivesSpace functionality and plugins that we've developed to move materials offsite. And now with our offsite workflows firmly established, how we're looking to analyze this data about offsite collections for work prioritization. So first, I'll just give you a little background about our use of the system. NYU Libraries migrated to ArchivesSpace from Archivist Toolkit in the summer of 2016. We were going into version 1.5, so we were looking forward to taking advantage of new top container and location functionality. And at the same time as we were doing this, we were facing a few common realities for archives, a renovation, and limited on-site storage space. 3 archival repositories at NYU, the Fales Library, the Tamiment Library and Wagner Labor Archives, and the University Archives, were soon to combine into one special collections department alongside a renovation of their spaces. And so while my department was creating unified accessioning, arrangement, and description practices across these repositories, we were also thinking ahead to every archival collection stored in our main library moving at least once, and needing to move as much collection material offsite as possible to make room for new acquisitions. As with Archivist Toolkit before it, we wanted ArchivesSpace to be our system of record, and we wanted to take advantage of the new data model, as I mentioned, for locations and top containers. We also wanted to address some local needs for moving materials offsite and managing digitization, and we looked to do this through plugins that would keep the data living in ArchivesSpace. While everything I'll talk about today relies heavily on location and top container records, we did use these 2 record types as a starting point to build off of. And the 2 plugins that we developed, the MARC export plugin and the digitization work order plugin, are both available on GitHub, and they're what we manage to use these workflows. I'm going to talk about them in the context of offsiting, and then later this morning, my colleague Rachel Searcy will actually demonstrate them for you. One other thing I want to mention is that these workflows demonstrate how we use ArchivesSpace in a larger universe of systems in the library. ArchivesSpace is our system of record, but also the starting point for a lot of description that flows into other systems, including our discovery portal, which is Blacklight-based, Aleph, our ILS, KayaSoft, which is the accessioning system for offsite storage, and Aeon. Fortunately, while we were implementing ArchivesSpace, we could piggyback onto some very mature scripts that the library was already using to send circulating material offsite with Aeon and KayaSoft. So during implementation and migration, we were examining existing practices that could be improved with ArchivesSpace, and I really zeroed in on MARC record exports because they were the most painful for me as the person responsible for cataloging. We previously used an export plugin for Archivist Toolkit, which cleaned up known issues with MARC field and subfield mapping, but still relied on a somewhat complicated series of Python scripts to create holdings records for Aleph and KayaSoft. This was only the start of a process which ended with communicating to the storage facility the size of the boxes we needed to send, rough linear footage count, and distinguishing both for ourselves and the facility which boxes from a collection might be shipping versus which would stay on site. KayaSoft draws all of its intake data about the collections and items directly from Aleph, so we wanted as much information as possible to then start in ArchivesSpace and flow into Aleph. And I knew we'd be updating these records frequently as we added accretions or shipped new portions of collections off-site. So we wanted to do all this by batch updating the records rather than manually adding new holdings individually. So that meant the MARC records coming out of ArchivesSpace needed to be as accurate and comprehensive as possible, so we didn't accidentally overwrite holdings information in Aleph about collections already off-site. So we knew the exporter should look at the top container record for the container indicator and the barcode, and our plugin developer at NYU, Aisha Data, was able to point the exporter to also analyze the container's location. Here's some logic that I wrote up for her that mapped these specific location records to item processing statuses that are loaded into the Aleph Holdings record. If the exporter could also then insert these subfields into our local holdings fields about the containers, it would be very helpful, and they'd be ready to go into Aleph with very little manual futzing from me. Fortunately, we were successful in getting the plugin to search and interpret the location records and insert the processing status codes. The holdings record then feeds into a manifest of materials, mostly circulating books with a growing number of archival boxes that tells both internal NYU staff and Clancy, our facility, what materials are leaving from one of two buildings. Based on what data I knew the plugin required to create these new fields, I instituted local location management policies that require archivists submitting a request for collection cataloging to have all offsite and offsite preparation locations added to the top container records for it truly to be considered final. It helps that this can all be done in batch and top containers. That way, when a MARC record for this resource is exported, we'll safely keep our data about the boxes that are already off-site. We'll add or change information about boxes shipping off-site for the first time, and then we'll leave alone boxes that are staying on-site, which aligns with library-wide policy for on-site holdings. I also set a policy that any container shipping offsite must have a container profile, and combined with a building-wide shelf read that we're conducting, this ensures that we have accurate information about the true size of the collections. We can also use the container profiles to estimate how many carts and the size of the truck needed for our monthly pickups by either looking at or exporting reports from the two offsite pickup location records. For example, this is a very small sample pickup I'm highlighting. We only have 3 manuscript boxes and 2 record cartons to go. This is a more ancillary piece of data, but it's been incredibly helpful to us when we realized, for example, that we need to split a pickup into 2 because we have more boxes and circulating books than a semi-trailer can hold. And instituting this workflow has really allowed us to scale up our offsite efforts and over triple the volume of material that we can send offsite each month. So I was riding high on those successes and very confident we could continue to use ArchivesSpace for our other offsite facilities when in 2017, the conservators at NYU began a concerted effort to stabilize and move artwork and large artifacts to offsite art storage. These items would be safer there during construction and also allow us to maximize our on-site storage shelving for archival boxes. These materials were a mix of collection items in the stacks that had proved challenging to store and actual artwork hanging throughout the repositories, sometimes without known provenance. The conservators managed their work in a web-based relational database, Airtable, which allowed them to record item data easily in the stacks using their phone and add a really quick and dirty picture from their phone as well to the record. Each Airtable record for each item had a unique identifier from the database, which is at the top of the screenshot. But collectively, we wanted a more meaningful number attached to the objects long-term. Many items were ultimately going to be tagged and not boxed, so having a box number was pretty extraneous. One repository, the Fails Library, already had a legacy descriptive practice of assigning art objects a collection-specific unique identifier, and we'd migrated those identifiers into the component unique identifier field in each file record during our implementation period. So I offered up the option of continuing to assign CUIDs, which is what I call the component unique identifier, for items without unique identifiers, and they would be created by the digitization work order plugin that proved amenable to the archivists who were going to create this information, the conservators who were working with it, and the curators. So once conservators had conducted their field assessment of the items, curators and archivists from ACM would then review the Airtable records. This is just a really small portion of what I'm showing. It's a super long record. They would link the objects to their originating collections or assign them to assembled collections of repository artwork without known provenance. When the Airtable records were as complete as possible, processing archivists could then export this data, which is structured in Airtable, clean up titles and descriptions and dates, and then import the data into ArchivesSpace. For import, they could either add the records as components to existing collections or create the new assembled collections, and we manage both of these using the Harvard Excel to EAD tool. So all objects received file-level descriptive records nested in an appropriate collection, and here from the previous slide, I've followed the Huger Gellert painting Freedom of Speech from Airtable into an existing assembled collection of Gellert artwork at the Tamama Library. This component unique identifier was created through the work order plugin, and the new item was arranged into the collection as determined by the processing archivist. Further, we treated many art objects as top containers using the guiding principle that no other archival object was going to be linked to its physical container. To do this, we'd create a container instance and use the component unique identifier as its container indicator. When the items were tagged, the queue had proved to be a succinct and definitive way to identify the item in its collection. And we've carried this practice over into items that are also staying on site or might be displayed in the reading room or curatorial offices, so we're better managing locations on the whole for all of these items. For the Hugo Gellert assembled collection, we've got items here in flat files, in Bope's library, and then large paintings in offsite storage. Since we never intended for Airtable to be a permanent system for this information, part of the workflow is that once a queue is assigned, it's put back into Airtable to communicate back to the conservators what the tag should read, and then we mark it with the next available pickup date. So we've had each of these workflows in place for almost 3 years, and as they've matured, we've been able to put more effort into thinking carefully about what more we should do with this data about our offsite collections. We're lucky to work with a department in our larger unit of the library called Data Analysis and Integration, and the technologists there have a keen interest in backing up important descriptive and collections data into the library data warehouse. This spring, we successfully got our ArchivesSpace and Aeon data put into the data warehouse where we can easily join it with Aleph and Chiasaf data using Tableau to learn more about the use and movement of the offsite collections. This is actually part of a larger project to look at how archival data across our systems may or may not be aligned, so we've also put Archive-It data in here as well. But I'm starting in Tableau with very simple questions like what boxes are moving, when, and how often. Atlas BI, which is the reporting interface for Aeon, can provide us with some of that information, but it lacks a lot of granular specifics about the collections and lower components that may be in ArchivesSpace or the offsite status in Chiasaf. So Tableau allows us to view circulation across repositories in the broadest context and to make better storage location and processing priority decisions. This graph connects retrieval frequency from offsite archival storage with archival objects using the barcode as the common denominator, which someone working with description is helpful for me to look at because this box on the left has been requested from offsite storage over 30 times. And so I want to know, are the files well described and of high research value? Are they poorly described and part of a really wide swath of the materials that are requested looking for something more specific? With these kind of statistics, we can think between our department, special collections, and preservation about what constitutes truly high-use material that should maybe live on site or what should receive better, more refined description to assist with research. And for the art objects, any kind of request we have, either internal or from researchers, can be analyzed to determine what should receive better photography with the digital surrogates published to finding aids. Since we've technically already followed our digitization workflow by assigning the unique identifiers, this shouldn't be that difficult, but we'll see. So I just want to circle back to the two projects I discussed and their impact. This has really increased our yearly productivity and the scale of work that we can handle. As I mentioned earlier, we increased the extent of collections we can send off site over threefold, and we would not be able to catalog almost 450 collections a year if we weren't exporting pretty clean records from ArchivesSpace. For our Arch storage project, without the digitization work order plugin, manually creating CUIDs for hundreds of items each year would have been really time consuming and probably wouldn't have been feasible along this scale of processing. So combining this information in Tableau, we're really going to be able to better analyze the impact of this productivity on use and researchers. Thank you.